G'day guys, Mackie with the Outer Circle, and today we're talking about 8th edition fluff. I think the lore or the stories in 40k can be fixed. I think not only can they be fixed, we can pave over the rough transition to Primaris Marines, Belisarius Call, all that. We can satisfy both the Chaos players, Xenos players, and the Imperial players. How can it be done? What I've laid out here is a 4-phase system. We have Phase 1, which is the Black Legion and Ghazghkull Unites. Phase 2, which covers the Craft Worlds and the Hive Rising. We've got Phase 3, the Imperial Civil War, and Phase 4 covers the Necrons and the Tau. Now each phase is broken up into roughly 6-month increments. In that 6-month period, you'll have about 3 months devoted to a single faction, and it will cover that story arc. Model releases, all that kind of thing. So the leading off point for this, in my opinion, would be the Black Legion. This would cover Abaddon's lieutenants, and they will lead the forces of the Black Legion in the Great Crusade, or the Black Crusade I should say, around the Eye of Terror, swallowing a large chunk of the Gothic sector and just devastating the Imperium, just carpet bombing them in that region. Chaos would end this series with their forces well established in real space, but basically they've outstripped their own supplies and they've just got to dig in on the point they're at before they get ready for the next push, setting up the threat to be paid off down the line. Now, possible miniatures that you could include in this range would be the 4 Lieutenants of Abaddon, or Lieutenants, however Americans prefer to say it. Obviously, new Chaos Space Marines in plastic, new Chaos Chosen, new Possessed, jet bikes and bikes, and of course vehicles or tanks. Why? Because all of the models that I've just mentioned haven't been updated since 3rd edition, with the notable exception of the Chosen, which got sculpts in 6th edition starter set, but they're a snap fit model and they haven't been touched since. Yeah, that's not good enough. So they are what I think are key areas that should be focused upon. The beauty of this is that you can save Abaddon as a big bad villain down the line. You're not shoehorning in Primarchs just to propel your story along. Instead, you can have these characters and you don't have to worry about building specific legions. Instead, you can just cater to everyone who plays Chaos with some Marines that would be similar to Primaris in scale, I imagine. Much like the Thousand Suns and Death Guard, how they're in the larger scale. That's the sort of approach you would take. And the units I've suggested are to just break things up a little bit. Chaos Space Marines, obviously, because, well, they're Chaos Space Marines. You need them. Possessed could be really fun, especially with the way that Games Workshop's loving mutation at the moment, but provided they're accompanied by reasonable rules as well. I say jet bikes because I think Chaos should have jet bikes. Maybe demonically powered jet bikes, and I'm not saying they would operate the way the Eldar or Dark Eldar ones do, but it would be a great visual difference between them and the Imperium, saying either this is technology you've lost or technology we've perverted, which is, I think, a fantastic thing from a narrative standpoint. So that would be your first 3 months right there, the Black Legion. The next 3 months would be the Ghazghkull Unites. The whole point of this plotline or story thread would be that Ghazghkull would finally begin his unification of the Greenskins and launch his war. This would be a huge lunge towards Armageddon and would just basically Zerg rush, or green Zerg rush in this case, a large swath of just the Imperium. Just imagine all the orcs just being drawn in and just ravaging through. Finally culminating the conquest of Armageddon or Ulanor. I've used both, obviously, because apparently Armageddon is Ulanor. Work that one out. But that's where they would grind to a halt, because Ghazghkull may or may not have other plans once he gets there. Whether he wants to launch a drive at Terror, which I doubt, or rather he'd want to fortify and expand an Orc empire from that central point. So the whole campaign would focus on maybe Commissar Yarrick, fighting a series of fighting withdrawals with Ghazghkull all the way back to Armageddon, and Armageddon of course itself falling. Why does it have to fall? Because the Orcs deserve a fucking win. And it really puts the threat on the Imperium. You're saying, hey, the big Imperium is crumbling. It's being eaten away like Swiss cheese at all these different points. Chaos is ravaging this area here, which is actually pretty close to Armageddon. And the Orcs are ravaging this part here. The story would end with the Orcs just basically all converging on Armageddon from across the galaxy in just unbelievable numbers. And the beauty of it is, they're right next door to the Eye of Terror, which sets up a Chaos Orc clash down the line if you want to go in that story direction, rather than having the Orcs versus the Imperium or Chaos versus the Imperium. So that's the second 3-month cycle, which ends Phase 1. And Phase 1 is setting up the two big threats to the Imperium itself. Moving into Phase 2. Phase 2 will see the craft worlds unite and converge. Now, physically this is very hard for the craft world, as in the spacecraft, to do, but for the sake of the story, you could either have contingents from these craft worlds meet up, representatives, that kind of thing, all come together. What I'd like to see done with that is that the hive mind is actually drawn to this hub of Eldar psychic activity. The Eldar sense the hive mind coming, and they prepare for the end of their civilization and a glorious last stand. The possible miniatures you would release for this are Phoenix Lords, Aspect Sculpts, and a Craft World Council, which is a concept I've come up with, which would be perhaps a selection of warriors or mages from across the different craft worlds that focus in their specific doctrines. So you could have like Wraith Seers, you could have say Siam Han Jetbike Autarchs, all different kinds of philosophies, as opposed to just focusing on the aspects. So, following on from the Eldar preparing for their last stand against the hive mind, we would go into what I call the Hive Rises. This next 3-month cycle would be the Tyranids actually launching their attack on the Eldar. And this would be a large Leviathan, Kraken, Behemoth style sized tendril of the Hive fleets, and it would just crash straight into the hub of the mostly united craft world Eldar. The Tyranids would just devastate the Eldar, but all the deaths of the Eldar would actually feed the avatar of Enid, and it would draw in such power from the loss of Eldar life that it assumes pretty much godlike levels of power and uses its energies to shatter the Tyranid forces. The Eldar are left bloody but reinvigorated by the rise of Enid, and seeing this new hope that it brings to them. The craft worlds would now combine their remaining forces and decide to head for Tau space to try and get their aid in what they see as the greater wars to come. Possible miniatures for this, I come up with something I call the Herald of the Swarm. So instead of just the Swarm Lord being the choppy guy, this would be more of your leadership guy. So using the tactics, and whereas the Swarm Lord would be better in combat and has the brains to beat any opponent, this would be shaping the larger strategic plan of the fleet. So acting something like a Norn Queen or something in that regard. Also I came with the Flesh Shaper, which would be something that would work similar in the way that Obliterators or Mutilators work with Chaos, in that you have a unit which mutates in battle, much like Yamal Gene Stealers do. The idea being that it takes on the biomass of those it's fighting and would get stronger throughout the game, which I think would be a cool concept. The next big ticket item that would occur is the return of a Loyalist Primarch. In this case, I've chosen Korax, but conceivably there are other Primarchs that could be, such as Leman Russ, Lionel Johnson, Jagatai Khan, etc. This phase is called the Imperial Civil War. The thing with the Imperial Civil War is that, unlike the other phases, this would take up the full 6 months on its own. The story would revolve around the Imperium sort of fighting with itself. Guilliman is challenged by one of his brothers over the Primarch project, and basically the Imperium is split asunder between those forces that agree with the other Primarch. I've chosen Korax because I think it suits him best, And Guilliman would have the other half of the Imperium. Essentially, we're talking military strength here. The difference being that the two forces would not be in armed conflict with one another. This is entirely story-based. The two brother Primarchs would be fighting an ideological war against one another. So I imagine Corax would take his forces and leave and head for the other side of the Great Tear across the galaxy, and marshal his forces there and head in his own direction with his technology, while Guilliman maintains the rest of the Imperium on his side. Obviously, he can't overrule his brother when it comes to these sort of matters, because Primarchs are equal in all senses of the word, and I doubt someone like Corax would bow to Guilliman. Using that as a distraction, Belisarius Cawl will decide to try and take power for himself on Mars, whilst Guilliman and his brother are out warring across the galaxy with one another and with Chaos. He will try and take up the mantle of Fabricator General for himself, and eventually Guilliman himself will return from the fringes of the war to intervene himself. Cawl will feel betrayed by Guilliman in this act, feeling that he should have been made the Fabricator General after all his work and all his millennia of hard work, that is. And like Luft Huron, who had noble intentions before him, he will turn renegade. Not necessarily Chaos, but renegade, working for neither the Imperium nor Chaos. And he will then flee. And when he flees, he'll flee in the direction of Chaos and Abaddon's forces. And Guilliman will chase after the fleeing Belisarius Cawl, afraid of his technology and the knowledge he has falling into the wrong hands, either Fabius Bile or Chaos as a whole. The great thing about this is that you don't have to have Marine versus Marine battles. Instead, I think it would be a pretty cool idea to build on the Mechanicum itself and focus on the Mechanicum, build up the faction that's really pretty bare bones in 40k, and try and make it into something that's really worthwhile, as opposed to this current sort of half list that they have. And part of it that's great is you could have Marines conceivably fighting Marines. You could come up for any number of reasons why they disagree. Again, this is all plotline to try and tie everything together after the drivel that 8th edition has really ushered in my opinion. Right, we're nearing the end now, so bear with me. Phase 4. The Silent King returns. After seeing the fallout of the Tyranid and Eldar war, and knowing the threat still to come, the Silent King returns to the galaxy in an attempt to marshal the Necron forces. The task is made a lot more difficult because the various Necron commanders who've had their autonomy for thousands of years are more concerned about fighting with one another and trying to gain their own power than with the threat to all life. This is a pretty simple story. I'd like to see miniatures such as the Silent King included, perhaps Honor Guard to the Silent King, and Necron relic units of some description. Something we haven't seen before, maybe similar to the Monolith or the Tesseract Vault, that plays up that sort of feel as opposed to croissant shapes. Because that whole imposing black obelisk vibe is, I think, a pretty good theme to go with. More impressive than the crappy looking croissant ships. But that's my opinion. These are just units I'm suggesting because it would be interesting to see. The last stage in Phase 4 would be the Tau. The Tau Empire at this point would be preparing its forces to crush the Farside enclaves. Because at this point in time, the Imperium has withdrawn, the Orcs have left, the Tyranids have left, the Tau are basically in splendid isolation, because all their enemies have been drawn off fighting in other parts of the galaxy, and the Tau hierarchy wants to use this opportunity to finally crush the Farside enclaves for going against what they foresee as the greater good. And just as the Farside Empire, or the Farside enclaves and the Tau Empire prepare to finally clash, the Eldar will intervene. There could be any sort of political shake-up that comes from this, but what would happen is the Tau will be informed of the wider threat to the galaxy and what's really going on far out there, across the galaxy, away from the Damocles Gulf. The Eldar will seek to guide the Tau, who they see as heirs to the galaxy should they fall, because the Eldar are now really reduced in numbers after their Eldar Tyranid war. The Imperium is withdrawing their forces at such a rapid rate from the Damocles region, because they're so desperate trying to hold on to their own Imperium as it's crumbling around them. The Tau will then try and expand rapidly and dominate that region of space. This will lead to an even greater technological resurgence than we've ever seen before. And with the Eldar actually working with the faction, we could see interesting changes to grav vehicles as opposed to more walkers. We could see different interface systems brought over, perhaps due to infinity circuits and that kind of thing. The Eldar could help the Tau with their own technology. I'd like to see Tau artillery platforms and perhaps some sort of specialist, I've said samurai style melee unit, which could be perhaps trained by the Eldar aspects. Because there is something about the look of the Tau that says that there could be some sort of combat breed of fire warrior created. And it would add an interesting close combat dynamic to an army which is already so heavily in the shooting side of things that there's really no reason why they'd go for anything else at this point. So if it's done right, I think that could be a cool concept. From here, pretty hard to determine what you do with the storyline. As I say, I love all these concepts of the Tau and the Eldar and the Necrons, the Tyranids, all having their own little scenarios playing out, where they're not all involved with attacking the Imperium. They're basically attacking each other, apart from maybe Chaos and the Orcs at the very start there. But even then, the story basically boils down to that faction winning. The only faction in all of this who's coming out in a much worse place is the Imperium, because the Imperium's forces are divided. You have a different minor Imperium, or Imperium Secundus, running under another Primarch on the far side of the galaxy, and you have Guilliman trying to hold together his side of the galaxy. At the same time as he's trying to recruit new forces, forces are being drawn away to fight Chaos, forces are being drawn away to fight the Orcs. There's the flare-up in the Tau region of space. The Imperium is in no position to help out the Eldar, who are probably the closest thing the Imperium has to an ally at this point. And basically, it's all gone to shit. It's still grimdark. That point is clear. But with the defection of Belisarius Cawl and the Martian Civil War, it's another thorn in Guilliman's side that needs to be dealt with. And it will have lasting ramifications, because Cawl fleeing means that there is a lot of technology that's now on the run, and a whole campaign could be devoted to Abaddon trying to get a hold of Cawl and get his secrets, and Guilliman trying to stop him. That could be a direction they go in. In fact, Cawl being that type of person, maybe Fabius Bile would chase him, or even someone like Perturabo could be introduced to the story, attacking Cawl's Mechanicum Art for his technology as opposed to the Primaris materials, and perhaps working with Perturabo could be Fabius Bile, who's brought his own faction along to the ride because, hey, he'll take the biological matter and Perturabo can have the technology, and that would be a good deal for them. So there's a lot of ways you could take this. But the important thing to take away from this is it's not just a repeat of Primarch versus Primarch. Faction is released, faction loses, that we've been talking about happening over and over again at this point. The Imperium is not getting better. Guilliman is doing his best, but he's one man, one Primarch, even. But that's still only one man. And no matter how much he tries and pushes and does his best, the Imperium is crumbling around him. And he doesn't have the resources on his own with what he's been given to turn it all around. There are just too many threats around him. And that would be the first 4 phases. So a good 2 years worth of story right there. Anyway, it's all wish listing, it's all a bunch of crap, and probably won't work out, but hey, I thought I'd throw the idea out there because it can't be that much worse than what Games Workshop's been coming up with, right? Anyway, I'm back with the Outer Circle. Please leave your thoughts and comments below. What can you come up with? What would you like to see done? Do you think the 4 phases is silly? Do you think 3 month release period for each faction wouldn't work? Do you think that things should be changed up with the Necrons and the Tau coming first, for example? Or Gazkul's storyline, maybe he should run into the Tyranids, but I feel that's kind of You know, immovable object meets unstoppable force. That's a bit silly in my opinion. The Dark Eldar, where they play into this, I still haven't figured out a place for that myself. Perhaps they could join up as a part of that craft world convergence, but again, I just don't know yet. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.